Are you ready to be in the spotlight? Are you ready to share your story with the world? Well, Snails with No Shells is where you need to be. Available on all digital platforms, Facebook, and YouTube. Snails with No Shells. Leave that shell at the door. Greetings, beautiful ones. I am Ms. BJ Martin, and this is Snails with No Shells. Leave that shell at the door. That's my only rule. All right, let's get into it. I would like to bring my next amazing guest. I'm so thrilled to have him on here because you'll see when I bring him out. Let's bring him on out. The amazing Andre T. Johnson.
Dr. Martin, how are you doing?
Oh, I am amazing. Thank you. How are you?
Doing well. Glad for the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for taking the time because you are here, ladies and gentlemen. This man is busy. You're gonna find out he is super busy, and I love it. Thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's get into it. I'm going to read just a little bit of his bio. He has an amazing bio, but I want you guys to do some research. This is Andre T. Johnson. He's a longtime sports journalist, and a spring 2000 graduate of the University of the Memphis with bachelor arts degree in journalism. I love it. Let's get down a little bit. He worked as a full-time staffer for the Commercial Appeal from 2000 to 2002, during which he was the beat reporter for the Memphis, what's this, Hound Dogs
Hound dogs.
of now defunct American Basketball Association, and the Memphis Explorers of the Arena Football to League.
That was pretty fun.
That was fun.
That
Oh
was
my
pretty,
gosh. And he was a senior writer for the newspaper, the Memphis Sport Magazine. He has interviewed numerous sports personalities, most notably, oh my God, this list goes on and on. I'm gonna read a few. Archie Manning, LeBron James, George Iceman Jervin, Isaac Bruce, Layla Ali. Love Layla Ali. Oh my gosh, she's beautiful. Colin Kaepernick, Vince Carter. What's up, Vince? I like this. We got Phil Jackson, Coach Phil. Oh, the list goes on and on. Lamar Odom, Derek Fisher. Oh my gosh, Colin Kaepernick, and just many others. He's interviewed everybody, everybody. A well-respected journalist. We're going to talk about that in its own right. A media savvy business venture. Okay, a uniquely designed media. Okay, no, we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about that. I don't want to get into that just yet. That's like the meat of it all. But Mr. Johnson is married to Latambria Johnson. Okay, the couple have been married since September 14th, 2019. They share a blended family of four. Yes.
yes.
Okay. All right. So we're gonna get into it. We're gonna get into it. Okay, Andre, because I skipped some of this because some of these are my questions. Where were you born and raised?
Born in the historic city of Memphis, Tennessee.
Mhm.
And of course, that's where I got my start. in media. And this is a story I always share. Growing up, um, I've always been connected to sports. Sports, essentially became my life. Um, I would, I think one of the biggest adventures is someone who was pretty much a loner growing up. I
Mhm.
had friends, but of course, with me, I would break away and go watch sports, watch ESPN. Of course, back during that time, ESPN would run a lot of tape delayed sporting events, and I would sit there and I would, watch those games over and over and over. The NCAA tournament, most of those games were being tape delayed, you know, on ESPN. ESPN, of course, wasn't the global movement that it is now, the worldwide leader in sports. But one of the biggest adventures that happened in my household as a child, my mom getting cable because even when I was on punishment, I would sneak and watch uh, sports on TV. I would sneak and watch um, ESPN, and then of course aside from March Madness,
Mhm.
around 84, 85, I got into, falling in love with the NFL. I remember my mom when I was 15 years old buying my first football. And on the box of the football was a picture of Joe Montana. And then from that point, I just fell in love with the 49ers.
Mhm.
Been a fan ever since. And my passion for uh, college basketball, NBA, the NFL just really heightened, from that point. I remember when I got into journalism school. Well, not journalism, way before I got into journalism school, but I remember when I was in middle school, I would pretty much, my mother allowed me to decorate my entire room with players, NBA players,
Mhm.
all the NBA players of that generation, in the early to mid to late 80s. Some, and those players were a part of my life at that time because I had those pictures all over my wall.
Mhm.
I made a personal pledge to myself that one day I will interview, NBA players.
Mhm.
And of course, that's where that passion for journalism began to emerge. Then, of course, once I got into high school, I began to prepare for the world of journalism. Not necessarily from an academic standpoint. I had some
Mhm.
obstacles there, but of course, I knew that in order for me to, even arrive at this point, at this stage in my life, that I had to devote my attention to academics,
Mhm.
go to a 4-year college. Even as an African American college journalist at a predominantly, at a white university, I began to understand how I had to work just as hard as my Caucasian counterparts.
Right.
I didn't get some of those opportunities to really expand on my mechanics as they did. And I saw this. I saw this in the college newsroom. But I was determined to work hard and kind of create my own voice as a journalist. As I tell aspiring journalists now, create your own voice, create your own writing style. And once I did that, people began to take what I want to do more seriously. And that
Mhm.
led to internships, and then that ultimately led to me landing a job 3 days after I graduated from college.
Mm. Wow. Wow, and that's amazing because most of the time, you hear young, especially young black men, young melanated men, it's usually about them actually wanting to play the sport. You see that so much. I hadn't at this, so this is my first time, really seeing someone, a journalist, a melanated journalist from this aspect. I love that. And so, for some of our viewers, especially our younger viewers, name some of these '80s players because they might not know. Like name some.
Well, yeah, I always thought that, honestly, I really uh, appreciate how Larry Bird and Magic Johnson changed the game as we know it because the NBA is so watered down now. And, during the time that I really fell in love with the NBA, in the mid to late 80s, we had Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, obviously Michael Jordan was coming on in the league,
Mhm.
as a rookie. For someone who people didn't notice, they wear his shoes all the time. But Michael Jordan I believe in his first or second year, actually suffered a broken leg, was out for the season. But he rebounded from that, and he came out the next year, scored 63 points in a playoff game against Boston, and the rest, as they say, was history. I remember Sports Illustrated having him on the cover the next week saying, "A star is born." And look at what he's doing now. He's still having a major impact, not just on the NBA, but the world of sports in general. But back in the 80s, you had these guys, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Moses Malone, Charles Barkley, Michael Thompson, Michael Cooper. That 80s Lakers team, that 80s Boston team was amazing. It was pretty much equivalent to the rivalry between the Niners and the Cowboys in the early 90s. They pretty much played every year in the playoffs. I think it was like a 3 or 4 year stretch that those teams played. But the way these guys transcended the game and just really took the game to another level, you don't see a lot of that today. The game is so watered down now. You have a lot of selfish players. They're more they're more concerned about getting a big payday, and there's nothing wrong with getting a big payday. If I'm with a major network, and even my colleague Stephen A. Smith has negotiated bigger contracts with ESPN. So I have nothing against an athlete or even a professional journalist negotiating contracts to get the big payday. But again, the 80s, the game as I knew it back then today's game is nothing like it was back then.
And I noticed it's like it used to be kind of a little more physical. It's like all the sports are kind of like, oh, you can't do this, you can't do that.
Exactly, especially in the NFL now. Some of the hits that these quarterbacks and running backs had taken back in the day, you can't do that now because they'll throw a flag. Now on the flip side of that, there are long-term effects from some of these athletes who suffer with concussions, even years after retirement. You have players who even suffer with mental issues.
Those mental health.
And I'm sure a lot of these millennials don't know this, but Junior Seau, who's one of the best defensive linemen in NFL history, back in the late 80s, most of the 90s, he retired, and then of course ended up unfortunately committing suicide because of long-term concussions that he suffered. So I can kind of see why things have changed, but again, I appreciate the game of the mid to late 80s and all throughout the 90s, because that is what really brought me close to sports as a journalist.
Okay, so you were really into sports. What was it like growing up, though, outside of the sports? We're going to get back into that. Outside of sports, what was it like growing up in Memphis? I've heard so much about it.
Heard so much about Memphis.
Yes,
Memphis is. I've been in Dallas going on 9 years, but Memphis is I can liken it to sports. Growing up, obviously, this generation is more IT, electronic device savvy. We didn't have that. And I was just a normal snot-nosed kid growing up in North Memphis, running up and down the street, playing tag football, riding Tonka trucks, going to summer camps. I remember those days, and it was always something linked to sports. Growing up from of my mother's children, it's just my sister and me. But of course, my grandmother had 15 children. We lived we had a big family. I'm from a big extended family. We always was a close-knit family, Christian-oriented environment. Church wasn't an option. It was a requirement.
Right.
On Sundays.
Right.
And I remember, going to church on every Sunday. The bus would pick us up and take us to church every Sunday. But then, of course, we would come home when my grandmother cooked these massive soul food dinners every weekend.
Right, like the movie, like the
Right,
Sucker movie.
exactly. It's
Yeah,
exactly
that's
how it
real.
was. That's exactly how it was. And I
Mhm.
remember, those meals and how families put a lot of emphasis on the sanctity of family. And
Mhm.
so those are the days that I miss because you don't see a lot of that now. That's one of the reasons, even as someone who's essentially a newlywed, I put a lot of emphasis on family. We have here, even in my household here in Dallas, we have, our family time on
Yes.
Sunday where we're sitting here in the front room, and a credit to my daughters and my wife, and of course I would kind of drift off and go take what they call an old man nap, and I come back to the living room. But for the most part, we try to still remain connected as a family because again, family values have pretty much dwindled
Yeah.
throughout the last decade and a half, and it's nothing like what it was when I was growing up in Memphis. So
Right.
for that reason, I'm forever grateful to my extended family for all those moments because it's really instilled in me the qualities of being a leader in a family, and it has really instilled in me the importance of having that family time outside of everything else I do.
Yes, yes, and that is true. That family time is very important. And like I grew up every Sunday and going to church every Sunday, Sunday school. So like we stayed in church Sunday dinners for sure. And even I'm thinking about even the holidays, Thanksgiving and Christmas.
Yeah.
I had uncle playing backgammon. There's playing chess. But then we were watching sports. We always had sports on television, right? And it
Right,
was
exactly.
yeah.
And, back then, Memphis finally got a professional sports franchise back in 1999.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, there were talks of bring the NFL team that had never materialized. The NFL
Mm,
team ended up going up to Nashville, which is about 3.5, 4 hours away from Memphis, Tennessee Titans, which used to be the Houston Oilers. The only move
okay.
between there. But growing up in Memphis is even to this day, Memphis is primarily a basketball town, basketball craze
Mm-hmm.
town, where the University of Memphis basketball is still the biggest sports team in that town.
Mm-hmm.
When that team is relevant, when that team is a national standout, it brings the city together. Everybody is talking about the Memphis Tigers, regardless of the segregation that takes place in that city. I still think that city is still segregated. Obviously, that was the place where Martin Luther King was assassinated
Yeah.
in 1968, and now there's the Lorraine Motel is a museum now where people from
Mhm.
all over the world come and visit that museum. But it's something about sports, and particularly basketball, in that town where Tiger basketball brought that team together. I remember when I was going to camp in the mid '80s. It was at then Memphis State University. Of course, the university became the University of Memphis in 1994. But I remember going to camp and meeting some of the players.
Mhm.
Meet just actually you're running to them because you're at camp on
Mhm.
their campus. So there's always a possibility that you're gonna run into players, and we look at those players like superstars.
Mm. Mhm.
And so that was the biggest sport in Memphis, even in the 1970s, especially in the 1980s, that 94, 95 team that went to the Final Four. What I was just thinking about that particular team the other day. And that's the mind of a sports writer. Sometimes we think about sports. We don't even tell people. But I remember I was in the car with my wife, and I was thinking about that 84, 85 Memphis State basketball team and how they went to the Final Four that year. At that time, nowadays the Final Four played in football stadiums.
Mhm.
Back then, 60s, 70s, 80s, the Final Four are played in regular NBA rings.
Right.
That's
Okay.
where they were being played. And of course, it wasn't as commercialized as it is now. And I remember I was just thinking about that 84, 85 team the other day and how, some of those players unfortunately died premature deaths.
Mhm.
Three of the four teams that went to the Final Four that year. Three of those coaches are already passed away.
Mm.
One of them passed away last year, which is John Thompson, black
Mm.
coach at Georgetown.
Mm.
And so he's coached at Georgetown. So I thought about that the other day and just thought about how that team brought my city together. And so, again, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, Memphis is pretty much not the Memphis that I knew when I was growing up. And that's not an indictment on the city. It's just that I would like to see my city, the town that in which I grew up, the town where I had my first break. I would love to see my city, make emerging changes like the city I'm in now, which is Dallas, Texas. My 11th grade English teacher, anytime I'm reading things on the internet, and I hear about crime, I hear about senseless deaths, senseless crimes that are coming out of my city. And I still follow all the media outlets on social media. So I would see all of these different, various senseless crimes that are taking place, in my city. And it would irk me. And I always comment under these posts, Memphis, national embarrassment. This is a national embarrassment because it was safe to go outside when I was a child. It was safe to go to certain places when I was a child. And now when I go home, it's always this question, is it safe to go here? Is it safe to go there?
Right.
And I remember my 11th grade English teacher, she sent me a direct message via Facebook. She said, it saddens me that you always have something negative to say about Memphis. And I began to explain to her some of the factors that supported my stance on how I feel about Memphis. And so she visited Dallas about a month ago. And she saw some of those same changes that I mentioned, the same comparison and contrast that I saw. And she ended up messaging me back and she said, you know what? You were right.
You're right.
Exactly what you're talking about. So, again, it's not an indictment on my city. I'm not knocking my city. I'm not down in my city because I still have loved ones there. That's where I got my start in journalism. That's something that can never be taken away from me. Right. That's where I finished college there. I didn't start college in Memphis, but I finished college in Memphis. I was blessed to have gotten a 4-year degree from one of the biggest universities in the state, and even as a first generation college graduate coming from a big family. So again, I would like to see a lot of changes in my city, and that starts with city officials. That start with even the school board is taking a black eye now, making national headlines for some things that are going on surrounding the superintendent. So again, if anybody out there listening from Memphis, don't think that I despise the city. It's just that I want to see some positive changes, and I want to see us making more national headlines for all the right reasons.
Yes, I love that. You love your city, and sometimes the truth is not pretty. Truth is not pretty. The truth can be very ugly, and the reality can be very ugly, And so someone needs to voice that truth.
Right.
Otherwise, it's just a big lie, right? So
it's all about being, that's one of the things I learned as a journalist in college, particularly in journalism school, was about, journalism is not all about writing to make people happy. It's not about reporting, should I say, to make people happy. It's not about reporting to make people sad. We report to inform, to be objective, to state the facts.
Right.
If there's a sex offender going on in your neighborhood and we don't report it, and your daughter, your son become victimized by the sex offender, then the media will get slammed for that. Why wasn't it reported? On the flip side, when we report it and this sex offender is caught by authorities and is taken in and sentenced to 30, 40 years in prison, then we done our job because we reported that. So, I think that's one of the biggest misperceptions that people have about journalists. We have to state and report the facts. And I remember one of my editor at the Memphis Commercial Appeal newspaper where I was hired, and I'm so forever grateful to that newspaper. And God rest his soul because he passed away a
Mm-hmm.
few years ago. He was the editor and publisher. One of his comments was, and at times I tend to quote it for people who want to knock journalists because people hate people in the media. They do, just like they hate attorneys, just like they hate pastors and ministers.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the quotes is, "If you don't want it printed, don't let it happen." He would always say that. And certain things, if you don't want in the newspaper, if you don't want the press to report it, then don't let it happen. So if you decide to go and rob a bank and you don't get away with it, and we write about you and we report it, well, you caused it. We're just reporting it to the masses so that it doesn't happen again.
Right.
And
Right.
so, a lot of times we get people tend to slam us a lot. I remember when I first, especially my rookie year as a reporter, I remember going to the barbershop and I would hear from people in the barbershop every week because I was just, rookie sports reporter. A
Mm-hmm.
lot of times my assignment editor would not send me, even though I grew up in inner city Memphis, my assignment editor would send me to cover football games in the upscale parts of town, in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
They would send me to cover those games on Friday nights.
Mm.
And so I always got these questions every single week. I walk into the barbershop. Why didn't you cover this game? Why y'all cover it? Y'all put this little paragraph in the paper? And I would explain to them. This is something I learned in journalism school because I was curious about it too. Why does the U.S. News and World Reports always ranking these colleges? They always got to put all these Princetons and Harvards and Yales and
Mm-hmm.
Stanfords and Cal Berkeley and Michigan and all these high profile colleges. Why you always rank them in the top 20, top 30 in the country? One of
Mm-hmm.
the reasons I found out the same rings true for newspapers. Most of those editors, those top executive editors at those newspapers,
Mm-hmm.
children go to those schools.
Oh.
That's who buy the paper mostly. That's who put big money into these papers, into these publications. Now, this happened before newspapers began to go on life support because most newspapers are um, digital now.
Right.
And of course, that's something that I don't like because I am a newspaper guy.
Right.
Um, and so, but that is the reason why. And I've always found myself explaining that to people, and people begin to uh, some went as far as to label me Uncle Tom.
Just my imagination, or is it just insane?